And good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings here on Now TV. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and I just really appreciate you joining me here on this program. And let me ask you to do something. Let me ask you to please hit the like and the subscribe button. We are now over 8,800 subscribers. And as I've shared with you, I am really excited about the possibility of reaching 10,000 subscribers in the year 2025. Now, I'd love to get more than that. You understand? But that's my goal. So help me out with this. Won't cost you a dime. Okay. And so just hit the subscribe button. Share with others the message that I am sharing. Now, remember, our program is focused on the challenge of Christ. The challenge of Christ is very simple, but it's very profound, and it's very, pun intended, challenging. Jesus said, John chapter 10, 37. Now, you have to remember that in verses 31 to 33, the Jews were taking up stones to kill Jesus because he had healed someone. And so Jesus challenges them and he says, "What good deed are you seeking to kill me for?" And they said, "We're not looking to kill you for a good deed. We are looking to kill you because you, being a man, have made yourself out to be God." Now, here's something you have to understand, folks. This is very important. Jesus claimed to be the Messiah. Now, he very often did that in veiled and even enigmatic comments, but he nonetheless claimed to be the Messiah. That was not a capital offense in Israel. Performing miracles was not a capital offense. But when Jesus said, "I and my Father are one," and when on other occasions he expressed that he had the authority and the prerogative to heal, not only to heal, but to forgive sin, the Jews immediately responded and said, "No one can forgive sin except God." And by that they meant the one true God, Yahweh. So here you have Jesus in this context being accused of blasphemy for claiming to be God. I mean, what a stunning statement. So immediately after that, following hard on that challenge and those claims, Jesus said, "If I do not do the works of my Father, do not believe me. Do not believe me for my word's sake, believe me for my works. So that you might know I am in the Father and the Father is in me." See, he's following up on his claim to be God. He and the Father are one. The Father's in him, he's in the Father. And that would be manifested by him doing the works of the Father. That would be proof positive that he really is the Son of God. So when I talk about on this program how important it is that we be able to answer the challenge of Christ, to be able to show, here is Jesus. He said he was going to be raised from the dead. He was. And according to Romans chapter 1 and verse 4, he was declared to be the Son of God with power by the resurrection out from among the dead. Yeah. He said he was going to do it. He did it. He was declared to be the Son of God. But that's not the only thing that he said he was going to do. He said, as I've shared with you literally hundreds of times now, the Son of Man will come in the glory of the Father with his angels and shall reward every man according to his works. Now, folks, only God could reward the living and the dead. See, this is another tacit claim to divinity. And he said, verily I say unto you, there are some standing here which shall not taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. And as I've shared with you, skeptics, atheists, unbelievers say, well, he just didn't do it. Therefore he lied, he failed, he's not the Son of God. But you see, what I've been sharing with you over the last several months, actually for about 3 years now, I've forgotten exactly when I came on air for the very first time here on Now TV, but it's, something like 3 years. Somebody that either knows that or remembers that can refresh my memory. I'm terrible remembering dates. So anyway, this is what I've been sharing with you from the very inception of this program. And that is that Jesus never predicted that he was going to come back at the end of human history as a 5'5" Jewish man riding on a literal cloud out of heaven again at the end of human history. Never predicted it. What we've been focused on the last few weeks is what I call the invisible resurrection. So let me very, very quickly recapitulate this concept and this idea, because boy, oh boy, oh boy, this is important. Because remember, traditional eschatology, traditional historical church doctrine says, oh yeah, Jesus predicted that every human being who's ever lived and died and decomposed and gone into the dirt or eaten by the fish, they're going to be raised up out of the dirt, out of the dead at the end of human history. No, ladies and gentlemen, that is not what the Bible teaches. Now, you have a wealth of material to draw from on this program, but consider the following. In Isaiah chapter 25, verse 6, the Lord promised to make on Zion, the word Zion is one of the key eschatological themes and motifs in the entire Old Testament. In Zion would be salvation, there would be redemption. That is where all nations of the earth would flow to learn about the God of Israel, to be taught the new covenant, to be invited in, and to be saved in and through the new covenant. Zion is the focus. So the Lord says, on this mountain, Zion, I will make a great feast, a feast of wine on the leaves, a feast of fat things, a feast of bone and marrow. So Zion would be the locus of the Messianic banquet. But it's not just the Messianic banquet. It's the Messianic resurrection banquet, because Isaiah 25 verse 8 says, in that day, what day? The day of the Messianic banquet. I will destroy the covering, I will remove the covering that is cast over all the nations, and I will swallow up death forever. Now remember, folks, Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, 55 and 56 said the resurrection that he was teaching about, that he was predicting, he quotes verbatim from Isaiah chapter 25 verse 8 and says, when the mortal shall put on immortality, when the corruptible shall put on incorruptibility, then shall be brought to pass the saying, death is swallowed up in victory. That's Isaiah 25 verse 8. But wait a minute. Isaiah 25 verse 8 would take place at the time of the Messianic banquet. You got that? You follow me here? Not only that, in Isaiah chapter 66, and we're going to come back over all of this here momentarily. In Isaiah 65, not 66, well, we do, but anyway, we have the prophecy of the new heaven and the new earth. Well, the new heaven and the new earth would come at the time in which God said, behold, and he's saying this to Israel, Old Covenant Israel, my servants, let me back up just a tad, you shall be hungry. My servant shall feast. They shall eat. They shall be fed. My servant shall drink. You shall be thirsty. Behold, my servant shall sing for joy of heart. You shall wail for sorrow of spirit. So here we have God predicting the Messianic banquet, the time in which his servants would eat, they would drink, they would rejoice. And at the same time, Old Covenant Israel would be hungry, they would be thirsty, they would be sorrowful. Now, this is the wedding banquet. This is the Messianic banquet. And it's at this time, this is what is so important, it is at this time the Lord said, "For behold, I create new heaven and a new earth." So, the Messianic banquet, when God's servants would eat and drink and sing for joy, would be at the time of the coming in, the ushering in of the new heaven and the new earth, and, verse 19, the new Jerusalem. For behold, I create Jerusalem a blessing. So we have here two prophecies of the Messianic banquet. By the way, Psalms 23, you prepare a table for me in the presence of mine enemies. The rabbis taught that was the Messianic banquet. Well, see, that correlates beautifully with Isaiah chapter 65. Okay, so we have the Messianic banquet at the time of the new creation. Now, let me ask you a question, folks. Do you know of anyone that denies that the resurrection would usher in the new heaven and new earth? Well, I've read an awful lot of literature down through the years. I've never read anybody that denies that. So you got to catch the power of this. What that means is that in Isaiah chapter 65, when God said, "Behold, my servant shall eat, you shall be hungry. My servant shall drink, you shall be thirsty. My servant shall sing for joy of heart, you shall wail." For the Lord God will do what? Create new heaven, new earth. This is resurrection. The banquet, resurrection, and new creation all go hand in hand, just like hand in glove. You cannot divorce these concepts. Okay, now then, very quickly, because I'm almost halfway through here. In Matthew chapter 8, verse 11, Jesus is approached by a centurion, a Roman centurion, who is a pagan. He's not an Israelite. And he says, "Master, my servant lies at home, grievously afflicted." Many believe that he had the palsy, was, experiencing seizures and what have you. And Jesus said, "I will come and heal him." And the soldier immediately responds and says, No, no, no. You don't have to come to my house. Just speak the word. I'm a man with authority. I say, come. I say, go, and men obey me. Just speak the word, and my servant will be healed. And Jesus absolutely marveled. He said, "I have not found such a great faith, no, not in all of Israel." Now, some folks want to say, well, the centurion was an Israelite. Well, no, that would mean that Jesus was lying when he said to the centurion, "I've not found anybody in all of Israel that has your faith." But if the centurion was an Israelite, that means that Jesus was finding that great faith among the Israelites. You see how ridiculous this is? And people try to argue, well, the centurion had to have been an Israelite, a non-observant Israelite. He was still an Israelite then. So anyway, Jesus then said, in responding to this man's faith, Many will come from the east and the west and shall sit down, now watch this, with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom, and the sons of the kingdom will be cast out. Okay, are you following me here? All of the rabbis talked about the Messianic banquet. The early church talked about the Messianic banquet. And they all said, Matthew chapter 8, verse 11 is about the Messianic banquet. I'm not aware at this point, honestly, I'm not aware of a commentator. I may have missed one. There may be some out there. I'm not aware of any commentator that denies that Matthew chapter 8 is talking about the establishment of the Messianic banquet. That means it's talking about the resurrection. Because after all, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would sit at the banquet. And many would come from the east and the west, these Gentiles, as well as the diaspora, because it wasn't just the 10 northern tribes that were coming from the east and the west and the north and the south. You know, pagans lived east, west, north, and south. So many will come from the east and the west and shall sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom. This is the Messianic banquet, but it's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob seated at this Messianic banquet. Folks, this is nothing less, nothing other than the resurrection. Now, here is what is absolutely astounding. And you just got to catch the power of this. In amillennial circles and in postmillennial circles, it is widely, I won't say universally, but I will say widely admitted and taught that what Jesus was predicting in Matthew chapter 8, verse 11, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob sitting down at the table in the kingdom, that is Isaiah 25, verse 6. Kenneth Gentry says that. Keith Matheson used to teach that. Not sure what he teaches now. He vacillates, depending on what book he's writing. Gary DeMar teaches this. To my knowledge, Jonathan Sariah teaches this. I believe that he did. I believe that he does. Somebody can correct me on that if I'm wrong. James Jordan, Reformed amillennialist, certainly teaches this. So what do we have? We have a wide variety of scholarship that admits that Matthew chapter 8, verse 11 is the Messianic resurrection banquet. Now, what's interesting is that Keith Matheson says, we today, New Covenant Christians, have and are enjoying the fulfillment of every single Old Covenant blessing. That's in his book, Age to Age. Well, then that means that the Messianic resurrection banquet has been established and that we today are joining with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Listen, when I was a young man, and I got to hurry here, but when I was a young man, I used to hear the great preachers that I admired, I thought they were great preachers, talk about that in the communion, which they equated with, the Messianic banquet. They openly said that. And they said, I remember sermons like this. They openly said, when we today participate in the communion, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all of the worthies of Hebrews chapter 11 were joining or are joining with us as we participate in the communion of the Lord's Supper. What a profound thought, folks. What an incredible thought this is. To just imagine that as we gather around the communion table, we are there with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all of the great men and women of faith who died for their faith. What a wonderful and inspiring thought. But wait a minute. If we today, when we gather around the table, if we are joined by Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, then that presents some incredible dilemmas for traditional Christianity. Because, for instance, in the amillennial world in which I was raised, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and all of the worthies are in Hades. They are not currently in the eternal kingdom. They're waiting for the coming of the Lord. Wow. When you stop and think about that, there are all sorts of ramifications to that. So that would mean when we're gathered around the table, we're not gathered with anyone except ourselves. And there is no union between the long dead faithful and us today. But, and here's where it gets really, really troublesome for the post-millennial world, and even for the amillennial world that says, oh, absolutely, when we today, when we are in the kingdom, and some of them will say, when we gather around the table, not all of them, but some of them will say that, then we are joined there with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and all of the worthies. Folks, stop and think about this. If today, when Christians meet in communion, and remember, Kenneth Gentry, Gary DeMar, again, I think Keith Matheson, James Jordan, and other noted amillennial and postmillennial commentaries say, yes, we today are in communion with all of the faithful righteous. Okay, are you ready to catch the power of this? If today we are in open communion with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom, then that means that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are no longer in Hades, and it means that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are in the kingdom, openly admitted by most. But it means that the resurrection of the dead has been fulfilled. When would the Messianic banquet be established? When would the Messianic banquet be fully enjoyed? By joining together the living and the dead? It would be when God would swallow up death forever. So let me ask you this. Gotta hurry. If today all faithful Christians are in unseen, yet very real, spiritual communion with the great men and women of faith who have ever lived throughout time. If we do that simply by being in the kingdom, or if we do that by gathering around the Lord's Supper, then let me ask you a question. How can we affirm that the resurrection has not been fulfilled? Folks, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were going to sit down in the kingdom at the Messianic banquet. But the Messianic banquet would be established at the time of the resurrection of the dead that Paul was talking about in 1 Corinthians 15 when he quotes Isaiah 25, verse 8, and says the resurrection would be when that passage, that prophecy, was fulfilled. So, if today, as affirmed by many, many, many amillennial and postmillennial commentators, if we today gather around the Messianic table, if we enjoy the Messianic table of fellowship and communion with the ancient worthies, I don't care where you want to put that. Again, doesn't matter if it's around the Lord's Supper, doesn't matter if it's at the communion, doesn't matter simply as members of the body of Christ. Does not matter, ladies and gentlemen, if you say that we are in communion and fellowship at the Messianic banquet of Isaiah 25:6 and Matthew chapter 8:11. If you make that admission, you are saying, I don't care whether you like it or not, and I'm not trying to be unkind or disrespectful. I don't care if you fully agree with it. It doesn't really matter if you've ever caught the power of that or not, but you need to. But if and when you admit that today faithful Christians are in fellowship with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the Messianic banquet, then you are affirming, you are admitting that the resurrection of the dead has been fulfilled. You see, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were not supposed to sit at the kingdom until the resurrection. There's not a word about, well, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they'll be taken out of Hades and they'll sit in the kingdom with you until the end of time, at which time they'll be resurrected. No, the resurrection banquet would be established at the time of the resurrection. Now, let me ask you, if you and I are in the kingdom, enjoying the Messianic banquet, did anyone see Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob being raised out of the dirt? No, you didn't, and you won't. And I'm out of time. I'll see you next week.